They say every childhood is one summer that lingers longer than the rest. The one that still lives in the corners of memory. The one that rises when the world grows to quiet. And for us, that summer was the last summer on Maple Street. It was the summer when time felt slower. The mornings felt warmer. And even the dust floating in the air looked like tiny pieces of sunlight. Nobody told us it would be the last one. Nobody said things would change. But looking back, everything about that morning whispered a goodbye we were too young to hear. That day began the same as always, with Mom humming in the kitchen. Her voice soft and steady like the rhythms of a hymn she'd sung her whole life. It drifted through the hallway, slid under bedroom doors, and wrapped itself around us like a warm blanket telling us it was safe to wake up. I remember opening my eyes to the glow that slipped through the curtains. That Maple Street sunlight was special. It wasn't the harsh kind that came later in the day. The one that made the sidewalk shimmer with heat. No, this was the gentle morning glow, soft, forgiving, gold like honey. The kind of light that made you believe everything in the world was exactly where it should be. Down the hall, I heard the familiar sound of Daddy in the living room, his boots scuffing the floor. The rattle of his belt buckle, the creak of the old couch as he leaned to tie his laces. His routine was as predictable as the sunrise in a strange way. That predictability made us feel protected. Even before we walked out the door, we already knew what kind of man we'd meet in the world because we saw him every morning, steady, patient, and proud even on the days the world wasn't kind. Mama called our names from the kitchen, stretching them along the way she always did. Chris, Aliyah, Elijah, breakfast. Her voice slid through the house with the same warmth as the smell of fried apples and buttered toast. No matter how cold the world could be outside, Mama's kitchen had its own weather, a climate of comfort, of cinnamon sweetness, and quiet laughter. And even though we didn't know it back then, that kitchen was the heart of every memory we carried into adulthood. When I walked in, the windows were fogged near the bottom, steamed with the heat from Mama's cast iron skillet. She wore her usual morning robe, faded peach with little flowers stitched into the collar, and she moved with that soft, practiced grace that only mothers who've lived too many long days know. It was her rhythm, her dance, her comfort. "Morning, baby," she said, turning from the stove with that smile that should have been framed and hung on the wall. "Morning." I mumbled, still half asleep. My sister Aliyah was already seated at the table, tapping her fingers on the wood, impatient the way she'd always been, her braids bouncing with each movement. She never waited for anything, not for the bus, not for dinner, not for her turn talking. Her whole soul was eager, restless, hungry for life. Even that morning, she looked like she'd already been awake for hours. "Eat up," Mama said, sliding a plate in front of me. "Today's gonna be a busy one." I didn't understand what she meant. To me, every day of summer was the same, running barefoot down the street, visiting neighbors, laughing until my stomach hurt, and staying outside until the streetlights came on. But Mama's tone hinted at something else, a kind of knowing that only adults carry. The kind that children don't understand until they grow old enough to miss the life they once lived. Daddy stepped into the kitchen then, smelling faintly of aftershave and old leather. "Morning, everybody," he said, rubbing his hands together like the day was something he could hold. He was the kind of father who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. His presence alone filled the room. He kissed Mama on the cheek, then gently tugged one of Aliyah's braids. "Got something planned today," he said with a glint in his eye. "Y'all finished breakfast quick." We exchanged glances, curiosity prickling at us. Daddy wasn't a man of surprises. Routine was his religion. So, when he said something was planned, we listened. After breakfast, we scattered through the house like we always did. Aliyah ran outside early to check on her chalk drawings from yesterday. Elijah searched for his shoes under the couch, and I stood at the doorway, feeling the warm air move through the house like a slow breeze of comfort and memory. Daddy eventually stepped outside with his old Polaroid camera, the one he guarded like treasure, the one that clicked louder than it should, the one that spit out pictures you had to shake like a secret. "All right now," he said, waving us over. Everybody on the porch. The porch on Maple Street was more than wood and nails. It was a stage, a gathering place, a front row seat to the world. Every house on the block had one, and every porch belonged to the whole neighborhood. We piled in beside Daddy, Mama joining us moments later. She adjusted our collars, smoothed our shirts, and for a moment, everything in the world felt paused, as if time itself was holding its breath. Daddy lifted the camera. "Y'all ready?" And right then, a breeze rustled the trees. The sun caught Mama's face just right. Aliyah laughed at something only she could see. Elijah leaned into me, his small hand gripping mine like he'd never let go. Click. A moment trapped in time. Daddy pulled the photo from the camera, shook it a little, and smiled. "This one's gonna last," he said. He was right. It outlasted the house. It outlasted Maple Street. It outlasted the world we once knew. At that moment, though, none of us saw the future coming. We didn't know that families would move, that the neighborhood would change, that the street would lose its laughter, or that the porch would someday sit quiet under a different sun. All we knew was that morning felt like magic, the kind of magic that doesn't fade, the kind that plants itself deep inside your soul and waits for the day you're old enough to understand what it meant. When we finished the picture, Daddy told us to meet him at the end of the street. He said we were taking one last walk together. We didn't realize he meant it figuratively. We didn't realize he'd been watching the neighborhood shift for months. Quiet signs, small changes, subtle things that went unnoticed by children, but parents, they always sense the endings long before we do. As we ran down the porch steps, I turned back for a second. Mama was standing there, arms crossed lightly, a tender smile on her lips. The sunlight behind her framed her like a painting, soft, golden, timeless. I didn't know why, but my chest tightened a little. Something inside me whispered, remember this. Even if you don't understand why yet, remember this, because endings rarely announce themselves. Most times, they look like any other morning. Except later, much later, you realize it was the last morning of the world you once knew. And that was the last morning on Maple Street that truly felt untouched by time. By late afternoon, the heat had settled over Maple Street like a heavy blanket. The kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the pavement. That slowed your steps and made cold drinks taste like miracles, but with the heat came an energy. A quiet buzz that moved from house to house. You could hear it in the clatter of pots and pans and the screen doors slamming open and shut. In the laughter spilling from porches where women sat braiding hair and trading stories. Mama was in the kitchen working on her famous fried chicken. The one recipe nobody ever wrote down but everyone remembered. The smell reached the street long before the food did, grease popping in rhythm with the radio. Her soft humming weaving between the notes of the song, out on the block. Grills were being pulled out, folding tables were being unfolded, extension. Cords ran like vines along the sidewalk to power radios and lamps. It wasn't an official block party. No flyers, no permits, no stage, just a neighborhood deciding, silently and together, that this evening mattered, that it deserved celebration, that it needed to be held on to. Daddy set up to old speakers on our porch, wiping dust off them with the side of his hand. He plugged in the record player, carefully placed the vinyl on the turntable, and let the needle drop. The sound crackled at first, a soft static like memories rubbing against time. And then the music flowed, a soulful groove that wrapped itself around the block. Earth, Wind, and Fire, the Isley Brothers, Marvin Gaye, each song felt like a chapter in our lives. Children began to gather in little circles, some tossing a ball back and forth, some jumping rope, some just lying back in the grass staring at clouds like they held the answers to questions we were too young to form. Neighbors brought out dishes, pans of macaroni and cheese, bowls of potato salad, corn on the cob brushed with butter, pies that glistened with sugar and the fading light. Plates were passed hand to hand, no one keeping strict count, no one worried about who brought what. Maple Street didn't do strict math when it came to love. Everybody just made sure nobody's plate stayed empty. I remember standing near the curb, watching the whole block shift into something sacred. The older folks sat in lawn chairs, legs crossed, hands folded, smiles soft but eyes sharp, taking it all in like they were storing these sights inside of them for later. Teens leaned against cars, talking slow, laughing louder. Little kids ran circles around everybody, their energy making the air feel younger. The sun began to lower itself behind the houses, painting the sky in shades of peach and rose and amber. That Maple Street sky, I have never seen another like it. Come on now, Daddy called, clapping his hands. Let's get these kids in the street. The music shifted to something a little faster, something that made the adults nod their heads and the kids' feet itch to move. They drew chalk lines for races, organized hand clap games, shouted rules for double dutch and tag, even though everybody already knew them. Aliyah jumped into the double dutch ropes like she'd been born in midair, her braids swinging, bare feet tapping rhythm into the ground. I watched Mama from the porch. She wasn't dancing, but the sway in her hips as she walked between people with plates and napkins held its own kind of rhythm. Sometimes she laughed, throwing her head back the way she did when something truly hit her heart. Sometimes she looked around slowly, eyes lingering on each face, like she was making sure she'd remember them exactly as they were in that moment. At one point, as the sky deepened into a richer orange, Daddy gathered some of the neighbors near our steps. He cleared his throat, y'all, he began, and the music was turned down just enough for his voice to sit on top of it. We've been on the street a long time. We've seen each other through a lot. Heads nodded, soft murmurs of agreement rolled through the crowd. This summer's been different, he continued. A lot of talk about folks moving, changes coming, new people, new rules, new prices. He glanced back at us, me, Aliyah, Elijah, standing just behind him on the porch. We don't know what this street's gonna look like in a year, he said honestly. Maybe some of us will still be here, maybe some won't. But what we got right now, this right here, he gestured to the grills, the chairs, the music, the kids, the sky. This is ours, he said, and nobody can take this part away. There was a quiet sound then, not quite applause, not quite a cheer, but something in between. The sound people make when they feel seen. He took a breath. We just wanted one more night, he added, voice softer now. One more night where the street feels like what it's always been, family. I didn't understand fully, but I felt it. Children feel truth in the room even when they don't know the words for it. The music rose again. People started to dance, not the polished, practice kind of dancing you see on TV, but the kind that spills out when your shoulders loosen and your heart recognizes a song before your ears do. Mama eventually joined Daddy near the bottom of the steps, and when somebody called their names, they laughed and moved together in a small, slow dance, hands familiar, movements easy. The streetlights flickered on as the sun finally lowered itself out of sight. The world outside Maple Street kept spinning, but for a while, it felt like our little block had stepped outside of time. Kids weren't called in immediately. Bedtimes were temporarily suspended, an unspoken neighborhood rule on nights like this. We played until our legs grew tired, until our voices turned hoarse from laughing and shouting, until the air cooled enough to make our sweat feel like a second skin. Eventually, the night thinned out. One by one, plates were emptied, grills were covered, chairs folded. The record player clicked off with a soft, final sound. Only the crickets and distant cars remained. I remember standing in the middle of the street, bare feet on the still warm pavement. Looking up at the sky. Maple Street didn't feel like just a place that night. It felt like a person, someone we loved, someone we were scared to lose. Daddy put his hand on my shoulder. "Take a good look," he said quietly. "Years from now, you gon' try to remember the way it felt to stand right here, the way the air smelled, the sound of folks laughing, the way the streetlights hit the pavement." He paused. "And you'll realize this was the last time it all felt like this." I swallowed hard, not wanting to believe him, but somehow knowing he was right. Because there are some nights you can feel closing even as you're living them. Mama called us up to the porch. "Time to come in, baby," she said. Her voice was gentle, but there was a firmness beneath it, the kind that always meant this moment is over now. We climbed the steps slowly, turning back one last time to look at the street we thought would never change. Cars parked at familiar angles, porches holding quiet silhouettes. The soft glow of lamps behind thin curtains, the chalk lines from our game still faintly visible. On the ground, it was just another summer night, and yet it wasn't. It was the last summer night that Maple Street still belonged entirely to us. Years later, the photo Daddy took that morning would sit in a frame on my desk in a different city, in a different life, far from the porch where it was captured. The street would change, neighbors would move, some houses would be torn down. New faces would appear, carrying their own stories, their own summers. But whenever life grew too loud, I'd close my eyes and go back to Mama's humming in the kitchen, to Daddy's slow walk down the block, to the smell of fried chicken mixing with charcoal smoke, to Alia's braids flying as she jumped rope, to Elijah's small hand in mine, to the evening when the whole street came alive one last time. And I'd remember what it meant to grow up back then, not in a world that was perfect, not in a world without struggle, but in a world where love stretched from porch to porch, where a simple street could hold a whole universe, and where a single summer was enough to last a lifetime. That was the last summer on Maple Street. And whether the world remembers it or not, we do. We always will.